Today is a bit of an anniversary because it marks 2 years since the World Health Organization declared a pandemic. On this anniversary, more than 130 current and former world leaders, Nobel laureates, scientists, and humanitarians published an open letter asking the rich countries essentially to stop obstructing a vaccine waiver. Here's an excerpt from that letter. It is within our grasp to end the pandemic. However, the cruel reality is that self-defeating nationalism, pharmaceutical monopolies, and inequality stand in our way. The European Union, the United Kingdom, and Switzerland continue to block the lifting of intellectual property rules, which would enable the redistribution and scale up of COVID-19 vaccines, test and treatment manufacturing in the global South. Now, low vaccination rates are really a huge problem, essentially in other countries. And so just 13.7% of people in low-income countries have received at least one coronavirus vaccine dose, according to the latest figures from Our World in Data. The head of the WHO recently warned that nearly 90 countries are not on track to fully vaccinate 70% of their population by the start of July 2022. That's huge, that's this July. And also back in October of 2020, it was India and South Africa that first pitched the vaccine waiver to the World Health Organization. And that waiver, or the World Trade Organization, excuse me, and that waiver would allow WTO member countries to change their laws so that companies there could produce generic versions of any coronavirus vaccines and COVID-19 treatments. So the idea, it was immediately opposed by the capitalistic countries. We're talking the United States, the European Union, Britain, Norway, Switzerland, Japan, Canada, Australia, and Brazil. And so what we also know is that the US trade representative is reported to have said that protecting IP rights and otherwise facilitating incentives for innovation and competition was the best way to ensure the swift delivery of any vaccines and treatments. And on May 5th, 2021, well, the Biden administration essentially did an about face, and it came out in support of waiving IP protections for coronavirus vaccines. But the administration has really failed to back up their words with any real action here. And so here is what we know so far. There was an informal meeting of the trade-related aspects of intellectual property rights, TRIPS Council, in November 2021, the body that determines global IP rules. The United States declined to take robust action to approve any intellectual property waiver and merely referred back to the remarks that President Biden made. Seems to me that the US wanted to look good by saying that it was down for waivers, but then when an opportunity came to actually do something, it punted. Cenk?
Yeah, so I think that we lack context when we see the news here in America. It's the failing of a lot of the media, and so I tell you that because I think that the Ukraine coverage has actually been excellent. I just wish that we would have similar coverage for other issues. So thousands of civilians have died in Ukraine, and seeing sometimes their dead bodies on the streets, maternity hospitals being bombed is incredibly moving, and it should be. And I'm really glad that there are cameras there to show you how brutal war is, so that we can stop not just this Russian invasion, but these idea of these wars. They're too sanitized, and so it's important to cover it with honesty. But it's also true of COVID. So I want to give you a little bit of context here. On October 18th of 2020, we had about 1.1 million people who'd already died of COVID. And that is 2 days before the US, the EU, and other countries first opposed the vaccine waiver. So 1.1 million. How many are dead now? Over 6 million. So 5 million have died since the Western countries said profits are more important than lives. And Biden said they should do the waiver, but it was just a marketing gimmick. As Adrian just explained to you, they never did anything about it. They never pushed anyone, whether it's our companies or the European allies. And as we see with Ukraine, if Biden wants to push European allies, He's pretty good at pushing European allies, and I give him a lot of credit for that. He organized them spectacularly in the case of Ukraine, but when it came to this vaccine being distributed to the rest of the world, no push at all. And since Biden's announcement, at that point, when Biden pretended to be in favor of the waiver, there was 3.2 million dead. So if you're just saying, well, how about the Biden administration culpability? Well, that would be about 3 million dead since we pretended we were going to share the vaccine with the rest of the world and we didn't. So those thousands of deaths in Ukraine are a heartbreaking tragedy. You multiply that by literally about 1,000 times that in deaths. And in a sense here, I don't know what's worse, but it's done just for profit. They won't let you have the drug and do a generic version because then they won't make as much money. But they've already made billions and billions and billions in profits, and they say not enough. 3 million dead. What if we saw their pictures and you saw all those grandmothers and aunts and uncles and moms and dads dying all across the world because of our greed? That is what's happening, and you should know it.
Yeah, I also think this story does, is a good opportunity to highlight how there's a lack of accountability for, particularly the United States on the world stage. And when you can't hold the United States accountable, it also means that you're not holding accountable the massive corporations that own the United States. But one of the things that some of these countries that are being disproportionately impacted by these patents was arguing for potentially was holding countries like the United States accountable at the International Criminal Court at The Hague. Unfortunately, that's not something that's like feasibly possible because the United States, one, is not a party to the International Criminal Court, but two, under the Bush administration, passed legislation that gives the president the authority to use any means necessary and appropriate to prevent the prosecution at The Hague of United States service members, elected officials, and government officers. So it pretty much ensures the fact that the United States will not see, under international law, any repercussions for, promising to release the patents and then not actually doing it, which really just means that we as a society have to continue to demand that this happens because this body that is supposed to be able to hold countries like the United States accountable for continuing to perpetuate a massive humanitarian crisis by not releasing or by not passing the patent waivers. We're like the only ones that can do that. We just need to continue to demand that they do it and continue to try to hold them accountable.
And absolutely, and this about face that Biden has done, it to some extent gets shielded in part because now there's a refocus in a different direction, which would be in the direction of Russia and Ukraine. And the thing is that there are still consequences going on as a result of not having these vaccine waivers. So the virus is mutating at all times. Existing vaccines are less effective against the Omicron variant. And although vaccines continue to protect against severe diseases and hospitalization, there is no guarantee this will continue in the face of future variants. At the same time, the cost to the global economy of failing to vaccinate the world is estimated to be $9 trillion. It seems that a lot of these companies would prefer to enjoy the wealth in their pocket, even though it's going to cost us all in the long run. Cenk, do you have any final thoughts?
Yeah, one last quick thought on that. Think about it, that's a redistribution of wealth. So the drug companies and their executives are going to continue to make billions extra, but the rest of us have to pay that $9 trillion in costs for all that death and destruction. It's not like they're gonna be like, oh yeah, we didn't share the vaccine and all those people died and it cost $9 trillion. Oh, we'll pick up the tab on that. No, they're not gonna do that. So we have to pay the cost both in our lives and physically in actual bills, while those drug companies make money hand over fist. And guys, they already made so much money, and I don't mind them making a ton of money from this. Those vaccines are really good, and they've saved a lot of lives. And they could have been heroes, and they could have been heralded as just like historic heroes. Instead, after giving it to the wealthy countries, they turned around and said, nope, profits over people. And I don't know that history is ever gonna go back and look at the decisions that those executives and the government officials that are in their pockets made. But if they do, trust me that they will not be seen as heroes. Thanks for watching The Young Turks, really appreciate it. Another way to show support is through YouTube memberships. You'll get to interact with us more. There's live chat emojis, badges. You've got emojis of me, Anna, John, JR. So those are super fun. But you also get playback of our exclusive member-only shows and specials right after they air. So all of that, all you gotta do is click that join button right underneath the video. Thank you.